Now, moving forward, this is the first type of qualitative data gathering. So the first type is the observation. So we have different types of observation. The first type under observation is called direct observation. So when the topic and the objectives are not well defined, we can always carry out direct observation where researchers will be the one to observe the participants and you write down information of a phenomenon or event that is happening in that scenario or during the practice or during the participants practice in the community pharmacy, for example. After a while of observing, you might have a better idea of the research problem and start writing the topic. So you can do direct observation before you write your questions or your guide questions for your direct interview. Again, you can have direct observation before you draft your questions for the interview. But if that cannot be done during this time, the direct observation, you can look for documentaries that would help you draft your research question that you will ask during your direct interview with your respondents. So direct observation begins with the first interaction the researcher has with the phenomenon to be studied. So when a researcher goes to the community where the community pharmacy is situated, that's the first interaction. So the place will be observed, the area will be observed, and then that would be the start of your data gathering process. The difference between the structured and the direct observation under qualitative is it is carried out with an observation guide and it is non-participant. Okay, it will be the researcher alone with the observation guide. You will observe, for example, location. You will observe the community. You will observe the population within that location. You will observe the floor plan or how the things displayed inside the pharmacy are being arranged, things like that. However, an unstructured observation does not need an observation guide and can be participant or non-participant. If you will do direct observation that is non-structured, you just can go to the place and just write down whatever you have seen through your eyes and what you have observed between the customers and the pharmacist, or you can ask at the same time the customers and the pharmacist with the things that you want to be clarified about. So that is observation. Moving forward to the structured one, in order to carry this out, you must first select the variables, okay? So in your statement of the problem, if you have already identified variables like physical structure of the building and the organizational chart or organizational structure of the company, so those are examples of variables, and that is the thing that you need to observe, okay? That makes your observation structured. Take into account the participants also, behavior, and the environment where it will take place, as well as any physical movements or symbols that are important to be taken into account. So the observation notes must be compared periodically. So when you observe, you take down notes and you compare if it is really constantly performed, and you have to be mindful of the things that are new to your observation to check the reliability of the practice. And keep in mind that you might need a closed or open observation notes, and then a chart must be present also. So there is a participant observation and an observer observation. So the role of the observer can be divided in participant and observer participant. So to be a participant observer is to be part of the community and feel and live what the target population goes through. In other words, this is an immersion process. Okay? But with our time right now, we cannot do immersion. So that is a participant observer classification. On the other hand, an observer participant is the one that carries the role of a visitor, with the only right to observe their behavior and environment without participating in their activities. So that is another example of how you do observation. Okay, the next data gathering process under qualitative is interview. Okay, so as established here, an interviewing process involves asking questions and getting answers from participants in the study. So that's the basic structure of it. So interviewing has a variety of forms. There is individual, face-to-face interviews, and face-to-face group interview. So we will discuss this in detail later. The asking and answering of questions can be mediated by a telephone or electronic devices such as your computer. So that would be applicable right now in our situation. So interviews can also be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. There are also other interviews as we call in-depth interview, clinical interview, history stories, and life stories. So to discuss in detail, in-depth interview. This is the thing that you will do later on for those who will perform qualitative data gathering and in-depth interview with your respondents. So it takes place when you interview studied population individually or by group so that they can freely express their ideas, their feelings, their motivations about the topic being discussed. So bear in mind that this interview establishes a relationship among persons, that you must have an opening question. So keep the person talking all the time. Okay, so during your data gathering, those who will perform this later, you have to look for a good facilitator that will have questioning skills spontaneously, that will not cause dead air or will not cause intimidation with your intimidation of the participants. So keep that facilitator talking, stimulating the respondents to get a meaty discussion during the in-depth interview. Ask them, the respondents, to clarify any ambiguous topics. And finally, invite the interviewees to conclude the topic. So these are the general background of in-depth interview. But before doing the interview, take note of the following. Take note, you have to be knowledgeable of the topic. You have to prepare. If it's a structured interview, you have to prepare your questionnaire. You outline the procedure starting from the opening until the closing or the concluding remarks. Then it has to be clear. The interview should provide easy, simple, short questions which are spoken distinctly and understandably. It has to be gentle. It has to be steering, controlling the course of the interview to avoid digressions from the topic. It has to be direct, in other words. And if it goes beyond what is the topic of the research, the facilitator knows how to steer it back, going to the correct direction. So you have to orient your facilitator with your research topic so that everything will move smoothly during the interview process. You must be critical, testing the reliability and the validity of your questions, and the information that you can gather with that question is a very important thing to do before the interview. Because if your questions are not essential, then your results or the answer of the respondents would not be useful for your study. Remembering, retaining the information provided by the interviewee. So we have tools that can be helpful in remembering these things by audio recording or visual recording. But this time, since we will do interviews using our Google Meets, then you can do record button. Interpreting or interpretation. So you offer interpretation of what the interviewee says. If you are the facilitator, you will clarify to the to the respondents, is this what you mean by the words that you have uttered? You will interpret and validate it with the respondent. Kung if the thing that you have written, the thing that you have interpreted from the transcripts are correct. Okay, so these are the things that you must do and you have to know before the interview process. Now, moving forward to face-to-face interview, this is a version of an in-depth interview. Okay, so it is useful in different discipline, and it is useful in pharmacy also. It is useful to target detailed perceptions, opinions, and attitudes. That is why if we are going to have qualitative research design, face-to-face interview is really suggested by the panel. So again, this can be done via phone, video call, or webinar, or our Google Meet. So when carrying out this type of interview, you have to be ready a discussion guide or questionnaire. So it is already established, validated before you conduct your interview. So take note that face-to-face interview is time consuming. See to it that you have the whole day or you have plenty of time to spare in order to conduct personal or our live video face-to-face interview, or your resources is allowed to do so. Like you have unlimited um, calls with your Google Meet or your Zoom. So it allows you to have an opportunity interpret body language. See to it when you do your interview, half of the body of your respondents is visible in the screen. So you can you can see the body language and the facial expression of the person. Then we also have clinical interview. So this is mostly on therapeutic or clinical interviews are kind of professional interview applicable to doctors or clinical pharmacists. These are useful in understanding the situation, or for example the disease, the condition of the patient. This is helpful later on if you will do clinical research. Another one is semi-structured interview. It is most common in healthcare-related quality research because the interview is characteristically flexible. You are prepared with a structured question, but you can still deviate and have to be loose with that questioning with the use of open-ended questions. In other words, you can explore experiences, and attitude. So you can do semi-structured interview where you will just identify main questions and then you have follow-up questions that are open-ended questions. So that would be very good to explore experiences and attitudes. This semi-structured interview, it has advantage of great flexibility, enabling the researcher to enter new areas and produce richer data. So it helps the researcher to develop a rapport with the informants. It elicits people's own views and descriptions and have the benefit of uncovering issues or concerns that have not been anticipated by the researchers. So it is important that aside from the content questions or the main questions you have prepared, you know how to do your follow-up questions. So you still have to prepare your follow-up questions or your probing questions because we have to gain information on their perspective, in their understanding with your different questions prepared. Okay?